If you've ever spent any time writing code, you know that nagging feeling that you've solved this exact same problem before. Well, today, we're going to dive into the idea that gives a name to those solutions, design patterns. And we're going to use the single most important book on the topic as our guide to see why this concept really changes everything.
So, where does this whole journey even begin? Well, it starts with a problem that every single one of us has faced, from our first day coding to being a senior engineer. It's that moment you're building, say, a user login system, and you get this weird sense of déjà vu. You realize the structure is almost identical to the logging module you built last month. You're just solving the same problem over and over again.
The source material calls this design déjà vu, which is just perfect, right? It's that moment you know there's a good solution. You've probably even written it before, but you can't quite pull it from memory. So what happens? Well, you end up reinventing the wheel. And that doesn't just waste time, it litters your code with bugs and inconsistencies.
And this slide right here perfectly shows the result of that. On the left, that's the code we've all written at some point, a tangled mess that you're kind of scared to even look at. But on the right, you've got a clean, structured design that's actually a joy to work with. The difference isn't some kind of magic, it's just having a repeatable approach. This is the exact problem design patterns were created to solve.
Okay, so if just making things up as we go leads to total chaos, what's the alternative? This brings us to the big reveal, the core idea of this whole explainer. And the answer is a concept called design patterns.
Let's get a formal definition on the table so we're all on the same page. A design pattern is a general, reusable solution to a commonly occurring problem. Let's just unpack that for a second. General and reusable means it's not a finished chunk of code you can just copy-paste. And commonly occurring problem means it's a challenge that engineers have already solved thousands of times.
The best analogy is to think of a pattern as a blueprint. An architect's blueprint shows you the overall plan, the structure, how the rooms connect. But it doesn't tell you what color to paint the walls or what furniture to buy. Patterns are exactly the same for software. They're the guide, not the finished product.
And what's really fascinating is that this idea didn't even start in software. It actually came from real-world architecture, from a guy named Christopher Alexander. He said a pattern describes a problem that happens over and over, and then it describes the core of the solution. That way, you can use it a million times over without ever doing it the exact same way twice. That flexibility is really the heart of it all.
So how in the world did this powerful idea from building houses make the leap into building software? Well, that brings us to the source of truth for this entire field. One single, iconic book.
And this is it. Design Patterns, Elements of Reusable Object-Oriented Software. Now here's the key thing to understand. This book didn't invent these solutions. It did something much more important. It looked at what expert programmers were already doing, and it gave those solutions a name, a structure, and a shared vocabulary so that all of us could benefit from that wisdom.
The authors, Eric Gamma, Richard Helm, Ralph Johnson, and John Vlasides, they became legendary. They're famously known as the Gang of Four. These are the folks who took the time to observe, collect, and write down the patterns that the best developers were already using, often without even having a name for them.
And this quote from the book's preface is so crucial. Patterns aren't the obvious thing you'd write on your first try. They represent hard-won wisdom. They're the elegant solutions that only show up after, as they put it, untold redesign and recoding. So learning them is basically like getting a shortcut to years of experience.
Now, the Gang of Four didn't just throw a big list of patterns at us and say, good luck. They organized them into a really logical framework that kind of acts like a map. And understanding this map is the first step to really navigating this world.
All the patterns are basically broken down into three main groups. First, you've got creational patterns. These are all about how to create objects in a way that's flexible and doesn't lock you in. Second, structural patterns. Think of these like Lego bricks for your code. They help you put classes and objects together into larger, more useful structures. And finally, you have behavioral patterns, which are all about how objects communicate with each other to get things done. We won't go deep right now, but just knowing these categories gives you a really powerful way to think about them.
And that brings us to what I believe is the most important lesson of this entire explainer. The real goal here isn't just to memorize how to implement a specific pattern, it's about fundamentally changing the way you think about software to level up from just being a coder to being a true software designer.
When you start to adopt this pattern mindset, amazing things happen. All of a sudden, your team has a shared language. You can just say, hey, let's use a singleton here. Or, this problem feels like it needs a strategy pattern. And boom, everyone instantly gets it. It helps you build better systems faster, and those systems are way easier for everyone to understand and maintain.
And hey, don't just take my word for it. The book itself says it perfectly. This common vocabulary lets you step away from the tiny details of the code and talk about the shape of the solution. You can actually discuss different design ideas at a much higher level, and for any team, that is a total game changer.
But of course, with any powerful tool, you've got to be careful. It's really important to avoid some common mistakes. Don't just start throwing patterns at every problem you see. More patterns doesn't automatically mean a better design. Sometimes, the simplest solution really is the best one. The goal is always clarity, not just being clever.
And look, if this all feels like a lot to take in, take a deep breath. The authors themselves left this wonderfully humble and encouraging note in the book. This is a topic you come back to over and over in your career. Each time you do, you'll understand it a little bit deeper. It's a journey, not a test.
So, to wrap this all up, what are the absolute key things to remember? Number 1, patterns are proven solutions to problems we all face. 2, they are blueprints, not code you can just copy-paste. 3, they give us a powerful shared language to talk about design. And 4, and most importantly, the real goal is to change how you think about and communicate software design.
And with that, I'll just leave you with one final question to chew on. As you go back to your own code, start looking for those moments of design déjà vu. What's that one recurring problem in your code base that's just waiting for the right pattern to come along and solve it elegantly? Thanks for joining me.